Wealthy heir dumps fiancée for a maid. What happens next shocks his entire family. The grand estate of the Whitmore family was alive with anticipation. Chandeliers glittered in the massive dining hall, and an air of sophistication permeated the space as waitstaff in crisp uniforms bustled about, making final preparations for the evening's event. It was the engagement party of Brandon Whitmore, the eldest son and heir to the Whitmore fortune, and Cassandra Layton, a socialite whose name carried just as much weight in high society as her future husband's. Brandon stood near the large bay window overlooking the estate's sprawling gardens. Dressed in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, he looked every bit the part of a man born into privilege. His parents, Richard and Eleanor Whitmore, had spared no expense to celebrate their son's upcoming wedding, a union that promised to merge two of the wealthiest families in the country. Yet, as Brandon sipped his champagne, he felt a gnawing unease in his chest, one he couldn't quite explain. "Brandon, there you are." Eleanor's voice rang out, pulling him from his thoughts. She approached with a wide smile, her diamond necklace catching the light. "You've barely spoken to Cassandra all evening. The guests are starting to notice." Brandon forced a smile. "I'll go see her in a moment." "You'd better," Eleanor said, her tone softening. "This is your night, darling. Everything is perfect. Don't ruin it by being distant." Brandon nodded, but as his mother swept away to greet more guests, his smile faded. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Cassandra, who was laughing with a group of well-dressed friends near the center of the hall. She was stunning with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer gown, but something about her felt hollow. Their relationship had always been more of an arrangement than a love story, orchestrated by their families for mutual benefit. And then, across the room, he saw her. Emma was adjusting the floral centerpiece on one of the dining tables, her blue maid's uniform neatly pressed and her blonde hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands deftly arranging the delicate roses. Brandon couldn't help but notice the way the corners of her mouth turned up in a faint smile as she worked, a sharp contrast to the performative laughter echoing from the guests. For months now, Brandon had watched Emma from afar. She had a way of carrying herself that was unassuming yet graceful, a quiet dignity that set her apart from the ostentatious crowd that surrounded him. There was something real about her, something genuine, and it had become harder and harder to ignore. Emma felt his gaze before she saw him. Lifting her head, she caught Brandon's eyes across the room. She quickly looked away, heat rising to her cheeks. She'd worked for the Whitmore family for a year now, and while she had always been polite and professional, she couldn't deny the growing tension between her and the eldest son. It was a dangerous feeling, one she had done her best to suppress. Men like Brandon Whitmore didn't fall for maids. And even if they did, it never ended well. "Emma," Mrs. Montgomery, the stern head housekeeper, called sharply. "Stop daydreaming and finish your tasks. The guests are arriving." "Yes, ma'am," Emma replied, quickly returning to her work. But as she adjusted the last rose, her thoughts drifted back to Brandon. She reminded herself that he was engaged to Cassandra Layton, a woman so far out of her league it was laughable. Whatever she thought she saw in his eyes was surely her imagination. As the evening wore on, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong at his own engagement party. The conversations felt shallow, the congratulations hollow. He excused himself from yet another group of family friends and wandered out to the terrace, seeking a moment of solitude. To his surprise, he wasn't alone. Emma stood by the stone railing, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. She startled when she realized he was there, immediately straightening and folding her hands in front of her. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Brandon interrupted, his voice gentle. "And please call me Brandon." Emma hesitated. "I don't think that's appropriate, sir." He chuckled softly. "Probably not. But it's just the two of us out here. No one's watching." Emma glanced back toward the open doors of the dining hall, where the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted out into the night. She felt a pang of unease. "You should go back inside. It's your engagement party." Brandon leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "And yet, I'd rather be out here." Emma frowned. "You're going to marry her, aren't you?" Cassandra? Brandon sighed, running a hand through his hair. That's the plan. The plan? Emma echoed, her brow furrowing. Shouldn't it be something you want? Brandon didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her, taking in the way her blue eyes reflected the moonlight, the sincerity in her voice. What do you want, Emma? He asked suddenly. She blinked, caught off guard by the question. But I just want to do my job. That's all. No, it's not, Brandon said, his voice soft but firm. There's more to you than this. Emma felt her throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as though she were more than her uniform, more than the role she played in the background of other people's lives. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to believe him. But then she shook her head, forcing herself to break the spell. You should go back inside, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They're waiting for you. Brandon hesitated, as if he wanted to say more. But then he nodded, straightening. Good night, Emma. Good night, Mr. Whitmore, she replied, her heart aching as she watched him walk away. The days that followed were a blur of activity as the Whitmore estate prepared for the wedding. Emma threw herself into her work, determined to push her feelings aside. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget the way Brandon had looked at her, the way his words had made her feel seen for the first time in years. Brandon, meanwhile, was grappling with his own emotions. The closer the wedding date drew, the more suffocated he felt. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life, following a script that had been written for him long before he had a say in the matter. One afternoon, as he walked through the estate's gardens, he found himself drawn to the small greenhouse where Emma often worked. He stepped inside, the scent of fresh flowers and soil enveloping him. Emma looked up from where she was repotting a plant, her eyes widening in surprise. Brandon, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? I needed to see you, he said simply. Emma shook her head, her hands trembling. You can't be here. If someone sees us. I don't care, Brandon said, closing the distance between them. Emma, I can't do this anymore. I can't marry Cassandra. I can't keep pretending. Emma's heart raced, her mind spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you, Brandon said, his voice raw with emotion. And I don't care what anyone else thinks. I want to be with you. Emma stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself feel the joy that was threatening to break through her fear. But she knew the consequences of what he was saying. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. Your family, your world, they'll never accept this. They'll never accept me. Then I'll leave it all behind, Brandon said. The money, the estate, everything. None of it matters if I can't be with you. Emma's eyes filled with tears, the weight of his words overwhelming. She wanted to believe him, but the stakes were too high. Brandon, she whispered, I'm just a maid. And I'm just a man, he said, reaching for her hand. A man who's finally found something real. Emma hesitated, her heart and mind at war. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth in his words. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. The confession in the greenhouse changed everything. Emma tried to return to her duties, but her heart wasn't in it. Every interaction with Brandon's family and their wealthy guests was tinged with unease. She couldn't help but replay his words in her mind. None of it matters if I can't be with you. It was reckless, it was impossible, and yet, it felt like the most real thing that had ever happened to her. Brandon, on the other hand, was a man torn between two worlds. For days after his declaration, he avoided Cassandra, his parents, and anyone who might press him about the wedding. He spent his time wandering the estate, his mind consumed with thoughts of Emma and the life he wanted with her. But the Whitmore legacy loomed over him like a storm cloud, and he knew that breaking free wouldn't come without a cost. The tension came to a head one evening at dinner. The Whitmores had gathered around the long dining table, the room filled with the soft clink of silverware and the hum of polite conversation. Cassandra sat beside Brandon, her laughter ringing out as she recounted a story from her recent trip to Paris. Brandon, however, barely heard her. His thoughts were elsewhere, on a woman who wasn't supposed to matter but now meant everything to him. Brandon, Eleanor said, her sharp voice cutting through his haze. You've hardly touched your meal. Is something wrong? Brandon looked up, startled. All eyes were on him. His parents, Cassandra, and a few family friends who had joined them for dinner. He set down his fork, taking a deep breath. I need to say something, he began, his voice steady but quiet. Eleanor frowned. Can it wait until after dinner, dear? No, Brandon said firmly. It can't. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Cassandra's smile faltered as she glanced at him. What is it, darling? Brandon hesitated, his gaze shifting to his parents. I can't go through with the wedding, he said finally. I'm calling it off. A collective gasp rippled around the table. Eleanor's face turned pale, and Richard's brow furrowed in disbelief. Cassandra froze, her fork clattering to her plate. Excuse me? Cassandra said, her voice trembling with anger. You're calling it off? Just like that? Brandon met her gaze, guilt and determination warring within him. I'm sorry, Cassandra. You deserve someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. And I'm not that person. Cassandra pushed her chair back, standing abruptly. This is humiliating, she hissed. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? To your family's reputation? Eleanor rose as well, her hands trembling. Brandon, what on earth has gotten into you? This is madness. It's not madness, Brandon said, his voice growing stronger. It's the first time in my life I'm doing what feels right. I'm tired of living up to everyone else's expectations. Richard's deep voice cut through the chaos. And what, exactly, feels right to you, son? Brandon hesitated, knowing the storm his next words would unleash. But he refused to back down. I'm in love with someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Cassandra's face crumpled, her shock giving way to fury. Who? She demanded. Who is it? Brandon straightened, his gaze steady. Emma. Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls as if they might protect her from the scandal unfolding before her. Emma? The maid? Have you lost your mind? She's more than that, Brandon said, his voice unwavering. She's kind, intelligent, and real, everything I've been searching for. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Do you have any idea what this will do to our family? To your inheritance? The Whitmore name doesn't get tangled up in scandals like this. I don't care about the Whitmore name, Brandon shot back. And I don't care about the inheritance. If being part of this family means giving up the one person who makes me happy, then I'll walk away. Eleanor's voice rose, shrill with panic. This is absurd. We've raised you better than this, Brandon. You can't throw everything away for some servant. Brandon stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing happiness. And if you can't support that, then I'll leave. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a stunned and furious silence. Emma was in her small room in the servants' quarters when the knock came. She opened the door to find Brandon standing there, his face a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. What's wrong? She asked, her heart pounding. I told them, he said simply. I told them about us. Emma's eyes widened in shock. Brandon, why would you do that? You didn't have to. Yes, I did, he interrupted. I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending. I want to be with you, Emma. And I don't care what it costs. Tears filled Emma's eyes as she took in his words. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could make it work. But the weight of the world they came from pressed down on her, filling her with doubt. Your family will never accept this, she said softly. And even if they did, the rest of the world won't. Do you know how hard it will be? Brandon stepped closer, taking her hands in his. I know it won't be easy, but I also know that I've never felt this way about anyone. And I'm willing to fight for us, Emma. If you are. Emma stared at him, her heart aching with both love and fear. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the sincerity, the determination, and the hope that had carried her through her own struggles. Slowly, she nodded. I'm with you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Brandon smiled, pulling her into his arms. For the first time in years, he felt free. The fallout from Brandon's decision was swift and brutal. Cassandra ended the engagement in a public spectacle, giving scathing interviews to tabloids about how she had been betrayed. The Whitmore family faced a barrage of criticism from high society, their reputation tarnished by the scandal. Richard threatened to cut Brandon off entirely, stripping him of his inheritance and removing him from the family business. Eleanor refused to speak to him, her heartbreak over his betrayal evident in every glance. But Brandon didn't waver. He moved out of the estate and into a modest apartment in the city, determined to build a life with Emma on their own terms. Emma, though overwhelmed by the sudden attention, stood by his side, her quiet strength inspiring him to keep going. Months later, the Whitmores were forced to confront the reality of their son's happiness. Despite the chaos, Brandon and Emma had built a life together filled with love and authenticity. Emma had left her position as a maid and started taking classes to pursue her dream of becoming a floral designer. Brandon found work in a smaller, family-run business, discovering a sense of purpose he had never felt at the Whitmore Corporation. One evening, Eleanor showed up unannounced at their apartment. Brandon opened the door, startled to see his mother standing there, her expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "May I come in?" she asked. Brandon hesitated, then stepped aside. Eleanor entered, her eyes scanning the modest but cozy space. Emma appeared in the doorway, her hands nervously clutching a dish towel. "Hello, Mrs. Whitmore," Emma said softly. Eleanor looked at her, her gaze lingering. Finally, she nodded. "Emma, it's nice to see you." Brandon crossed his arms, his tone cautious. "What are you doing here, Mother?" Eleanor sighed, sitting down on the couch. "I came to apologize. I've spent months trying to understand why you would throw away everything for her. And now I realize you didn't throw anything away. You found something I never had, real love." Brandon and Emma exchanged a stunned glance. Eleanor looked up at them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I still don't understand all of it," she admitted. "But I see how happy you are. And as your mother, that's all I've ever wanted." Brandon sat down beside her, his voice softening. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Eleanor reached out, placing a hand on his. "I just hope you'll let me be a part of your life again." Brandon smiled, tears in his eyes. "We'd like that." Emma nodded, her own eyes misty. "We would." As the three of them sat together, the weight of the past began to lift. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, they faced it as a family, one built not on wealth or status, but on love and understanding. Over the weeks following Eleanor's unexpected visit, the tension between Brandon and his family began to soften, if only slightly. While his father, Richard, remained resolutely distant, Eleanor seemed determined to mend the fractured bond with her son. She made a point to check in regularly, bringing over small gifts or simply stopping by to chat. At first, Brandon was cautious, unsure of her intentions, but as time went on, he began to see genuine change in her. Emma, meanwhile, approached the situation with quiet grace. Though she still felt out of place in the world of the Whitmores, she welcomed Eleanor's gestures, knowing how much it meant to Brandon to have even one member of his family on their side. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor invited Brandon and Emma to tea at the Whitmore estate. It was the first time Emma had set foot in the grand mansion since leaving her job as a maid, and the experience was both surreal and nerve-wracking. As they stepped into the ornate parlor, Emma felt a wave of nostalgia mixed with unease. She had spent countless hours cleaning this very room, polishing the crystal chandeliers and dusting the intricate carvings on the furniture. Now, she was a guest, a position she never imagined herself in. Eleanor greeted them warmly, her smile genuine. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for them to sit. A spread of delicate sandwiches and pastries was laid out on the table, alongside an elegant silver tea set. Emma hesitated, glancing at Brandon, who gave her a reassuring nod. They sat together on a plush sofa, and Eleanor poured tea for each of them, her movements precise and practiced. "I wanted to talk to you both," Eleanor began, her tone measured. "I know things have been difficult since the engagement was called off. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now that I made mistakes, big ones." Brandon raised an eyebrow, surprised by her candor. "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Eleanor interrupted gently. She looked at Emma, her expression softening. Emma, when I first heard about you and Brandon, I was judgmental. I couldn't see past my own expectations for my son's life, and I unfairly placed blame on you. For that, I'm deeply sorry. Emma blinked, her throat tightening with emotion. Thank you, she said quietly. That means a lot. Eleanor smiled, a flicker of relief crossing her face. I've seen how happy you make him, and that's all that matters. I just hope we can find a way to move forward. Brandon reached for Emma's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. We'd like that too, he said. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor's efforts to bridge the gap between Brandon and his family bore fruit. She began advocating for him with Richard, gently pushing her husband to reconsider his stance. At first, Richard was unmoved, his pride and anger overshadowing any sense of reconciliation. But as he watched Eleanor grow closer to their son, and saw Brandon and Emma thriving despite the odds, his resolve began to waver. The turning point came one evening when Richard received an unexpected visitor. It was Cassandra. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness, I thought it was time we had a chat. Richard frowned, motioning for her to sit. What is this about, Cassandra? She folded her hands primly in her lap, her expression calm but calculating. It's about your son and his relationship. Richard's jaw tightened. What about it? Cassandra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. He's embarrassing your family. Everyone in our social circle is talking about it. Do you really want the Whitmore name associated with a maid? Richard's hands clenched into fists. That's my son you're talking about? Exactly, Cassandra said smoothly. Your son and your legacy. But it's not too late to fix this. Convince him to end things with her, and I'm willing to reconsider our engagement. Richard stared at her, a mix of anger and disbelief flashing in his eyes. Reconsider, he echoed. You mean to say you'd come back? Of course, Cassandra said with a practiced smile. I was upset at first, but I've had time to think. Brandon belongs with someone of his own class, someone who can uphold the Whitmore name. Richard stood abruptly, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. Cassandra, he said, his voice low and steady, the Whitmore name is not just about wealth or class. It's about integrity. And my son, no matter who he chooses to be with, has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body. Cassandra's smile faltered, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. This conversation is over, Richard said firmly, gesturing toward the door. Good night, Cassandra. Furious, Cassandra stood, gathering her things. You'll regret this, she snapped before storming out. As the door closed behind her, Richard sank into his chair, letting out a long sigh. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly consider what Eleanor had been saying all along, that perhaps Brandon's happiness mattered more than the Whitmore image. The following weekend, Richard invited Brandon and Emma to dinner. When they arrived, Eleanor greeted them with her usual warmth, but there was an air of anticipation in the room. Richard sat at the head of the table, his expression serious but not unkind. As the meal progressed, Richard spoke little, his gaze occasionally flickering to Emma. She remained composed, though her nerves were evident in the way she carefully folded her napkin in her lap. Finally, as dessert was served, Richard cleared his throat. Emma, he said, his deep voice cutting through the quiet, I owe you an apology. Emma looked up, startled. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Richard said firmly. I've been unfair to you. When Brandon first told us about you, I reacted out of pride and fear. But I've come to see that my son's happiness is worth more than any societal expectation. He paused, his gaze softening. You make him happy. And that's all a father could ever want. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. That means so much. Richard turned to Brandon, his voice steady. Son, I've been hard on you. But I see now that you're making your own path, and I respect that. I'm proud of you. Brandon's jaw tightened as he fought back emotion. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. For the first time in years, the Whitmore family shared a moment of genuine connection, their differences no longer a source of division but a bridge to understanding. Months later, Brandon and Emma were married in a small, intimate ceremony in the gardens of the Whitmore estate. It was a far cry from the grand spectacle that had been planned for his wedding to Cassandra, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Surrounded by close friends and family, the couple exchanged vows beneath a canopy of flowers, their love shining brighter than any diamond. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as she watched her son kiss his bride. Richard stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, a small smile playing at his lips. For the first time in a long time, the Whitmore family felt whole. As Brandon and Emma walked hand in hand down the aisle, the guests erupted into applause. The newlyweds beamed, their joy infectious. In the years that followed, Brandon and Emma built a life together rooted in love, honesty, and mutual respect. Emma opened her own floral design business, her talent quickly earning her a reputation as one of the best in the city. Brandon, free from the constraints of his family's expectations, found fulfillment in running a small business that focused on community development. The Whitmore estate became a gathering place for family and friends, its grand halls filled with laughter and warmth. Eleanor and Richard doted on their grandchildren, who brought new life to the old mansion. As they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the gardens, Brandon turned to Emma and smiled. "Do you ever think about how crazy this all started?" he asked. Emma laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "All the time. But I wouldn't change a thing." Brandon kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "Me neither." And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the Whitmore estate stood as a testament to the power of love, proof that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the happiest endings. Brandon and Emma's life flourished in ways neither of them could have imagined. Their union, once a point of controversy, had evolved into a beacon of hope for the Whitmore family and those around them. The couple's love and determination to stay true to themselves inspired everyone who knew them, and their lives became a balance of both intimacy and purpose. However, not everyone was ready to let go of the past. The drama reignited one chilly autumn morning when an article appeared in one of the city's most notorious tabloids. The headline read, "From Maid to Matriarch, the Whitmore Scandal That Won't Go Away." The article was an ugly mix of speculation, exaggerated tales, and outright lies. It painted Emma as a gold digger who had strategically seduced Brandon to elevate her social status. It dredged up her humble beginnings, twisting her life story to make it seem as though she had schemed her way into the Whitmore family fortune. Emma discovered the article when one of her clients awkwardly mentioned it while picking up a bouquet. Her face burned with humiliation as she quickly looked it up on her phone. As she read the cruel words, her heart sank. The quiet life she and Brandon had built seemed under attack, and she couldn't help but feel the sting of old insecurities resurfacing. Brandon was furious when Emma showed him the article. "This is absolute garbage," he said, pacing their living room, the newspaper crumpled in his hand. "They have no right to talk about you like this." "It doesn't matter if it's true or not," Emma said quietly, sitting on the couch. "People will believe it. They always do." Brandon knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me. None of this nonsense defines you, or us. We know the truth. That's all that matters." Emma wanted to believe him, but the fear of judgment still gnawed at her. I don't want this to hurt your family any more than it already has." Brandon's expression softened, his voice steady. "Emma, you are my family. And I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." As the days passed, the tabloid story spread like wildfire, fueling gossip in high society. Cassandra, not one to miss an opportunity, gave a scathing interview to a competing outlet, claiming she was not surprised by Emma's rise to prominence and insinuating that she had always known Emma's true intentions. When Eleanor and Richard learned of the article, their reactions couldn't have been more different. Eleanor immediately reached out to Brandon and Emma, offering her support and assuring them that the family would do everything in their power to quash the rumors. Richard, however, was less vocal. While he no longer openly disapproved of Emma, he had always been a man who cared deeply about the Whitmore name and its reputation. The scandal clearly weighed on him. Brandon decided it was time to confront the issue head-on. He and Emma arranged a press conference, determined to set the record straight. It was a daunting decision. Emma had never been comfortable in the spotlight, but she knew that staying silent would only allow the lies to fester. The press conference was held at a modest venue in the city. Dozens of reporters crowded the room, their cameras and microphones trained on Brandon and Emma as they took the stage. Brandon's hand rested reassuringly on Emma's back as she adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," Brandon began, his voice calm but firm. "My wife and I have called this press conference to address the false and defamatory rumors that have been circulating about us." He paused, glancing at Emma, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Emma is one of the most genuine, kind, and hardworking people I've ever met. Our relationship is built on love and mutual respect, not the baseless accusations that some have chosen to spread. Emma took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped forward. "I never expected to be in the public eye," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I come from a humble background, and I'm proud of that. But my past doesn't define me, it's shaped me. And anyone who truly knows me understands that my love for Brandon has nothing to do with wealth or status." Her words resonated, and the room fell silent as she continued. "We're here today to ask for understanding and fairness. We're just two people who fell in love and are trying to live a life we're proud of. That's all." The press conference ended with a round of applause from the crowd, a testament to the sincerity of their words. While not everyone would be convinced, Brandon and Emma left the venue feeling a renewed sense of control over their narrative. In the weeks that followed, public sentiment began to shift. Support poured in from unexpected places, letters from strangers who related to Emma's story, messages of encouragement on social media, and even a heartfelt note from a former Whitmore employee who praised Emma's character and work ethic. Cassandra's attempts to further smear Emma's name backfired, as more and more people began to see her for what she truly was. A bitter woman clinging to a life that had never been hers to begin with. Amid the chaos, Brandon and Emma found solace in their everyday lives. Emma's floral design business continued to thrive, her creations bringing beauty and joy to countless events. Brandon, now fully immersed in his role at the community development company, found purpose in projects that uplifted underserved neighborhoods. One day, as they worked together to prepare for a charity gala, an event benefiting local schools, Eleanor arrived with unexpected news. "I've been doing some thinking," she said, sitting down at their kitchen table. "And I've decided it's time for me to step back from some of my roles at the foundation." Brandon frowned. "What do you mean?" Eleanor smiled. "I mean, I'd like you and Emma to take on a larger role. You both have such a fresh perspective, and I think the foundation would benefit from your leadership." Emma's eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know if I'm qualified." "Nonsense," Eleanor interrupted. "You've proven time and time again that you have the heart and the vision to make a difference. And the two of you together, well, I can't think of a better team." Brandon and Emma exchanged a glance, their hands finding each other's beneath the table. "We'd be honored," Brandon said, his voice filled with emotion. The foundation became a new chapter in their lives, allowing them to combine their passions and give back in meaningful ways. Under their leadership, the organization launched initiatives focused on education, affordable housing, and environmental sustainability. Emma brought her unique touch to the projects, incorporating community gardens and floral workshops that became a source of healing and connection for many. Richard, once skeptical of Emma's place in the family, became one of her biggest supporters. He often visited the foundation's headquarters, offering advice and sharing stories from his own years of leadership. Over time, he and Emma developed a mutual respect that surprised them both. Years later, the Whitmore estate was once again alive with celebration. This time, it wasn't for an engagement or a wedding, it was for the foundation's 10th anniversary. The grand hall was filled with friends, family, and supporters, all gathered to honor the legacy Brandon and Emma had built together. As Brandon stood to give a speech, his eyes scanned the room, landing on Emma, who was holding their young daughter in her arms. He smiled, his voice steady as he began. 10 years ago, I made a choice that changed my life, he said. I chose to follow my heart, to stand up for what I believed in, and to build a life with the woman I love. That choice wasn't always easy, but it was the best decision I ever made. He turned to Emma, his expression softening. Emma, you've taught me what it means to love deeply, to lead with kindness, and to see beauty in every corner of the world. None of this would be possible without you. The room erupted into applause, and Emma's eyes filled with tears as she mouthed, "I love you." As the night went on, the Whitmore family mingled with the guests, their laughter and joy filling the air. For all the challenges they had faced, they had emerged stronger, their love and resilience lighting the way forward. And as Brandon and Emma danced together beneath the glittering chandeliers, they knew that their story, one of courage, perseverance, and unwavering love, was far from over. As the Whitmore Foundation's 10th anniversary gala carried on into the night, the laughter, music, and heartfelt conversations filled the grand hall. The evening was a celebration not just of the foundation's work, but of the journey that had brought Brandon and Emma to this moment. A journey filled with struggles, triumphs, and an unshakable commitment to each other. But even in the midst of the joy, life, as always, had more challenges to present. The next morning, Brandon and Emma sat at their kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading through notes from the gala. Their daughter, Lily, toddled around the room, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. The sunlight streaming through the windows painted a picture of warmth and contentment, but that peace was interrupted when Brandon's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was his father, Richard. Brandon hesitated, glancing at Emma before answering. "Dad? What's up?" Richard's voice was measured, but there was an edge of urgency. "I just got off the phone with an old associate from Whitmore Enterprises. They're considering liquidating one of the company's most important community investment programs." Brandon frowned, his brow furrowing. "But that program was designed to revitalize underserved neighborhoods." "It's a matter of profit," Richard said bluntly. "The board thinks it's not worth the financial risk anymore. But I thought you should know, they're meeting about it tomorrow." Brandon's grip on the phone tightened. The program in question was one he had helped design before leaving Whitmore Enterprises. It had been one of the few ways he could use his family's wealth to genuinely help others. The thought of it being shut down stirred something deep within him. "I'll be there," Brandon said firmly. Emma looked at him as he hung up, concern etched on her face. "What's going on?" Brandon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The board at Whitmore Enterprises is planning to cut the community investment program. I can't let that happen." Emma nodded, understanding his frustration. "Do you think they'll listen to you?" Brandon paused, then gave her a determined look. "They'll have to." The next day, Brandon entered the towering Whitmore Enterprises building for the first time in years. It felt strange to be back in the place where he had spent so much of his early adulthood, trying to live up to his family's expectations. Now, he was returning not as the heir to the empire, but as someone fighting to protect the values he believed in. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces, men and women in sharp suits, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution as Brandon entered. At the head of the table sat the chairman, a man named Arthur Graves, whose stern demeanor matched his reputation for prioritizing profit above all else. "Brandon," Arthur said, his tone polite but cool. "This is unexpected." "I heard about the meeting," Brandon replied, taking a seat. "And I'm here to make the case for keeping the community investment program." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Brandon, you no longer have a stake in this company. Why should we listen to you?" Brandon met his gaze without flinching. "Because this program isn't just a line item on a spreadsheet. It's a lifeline for the communities it serves. Cutting it might save you money in the short term, but the long-term consequences will be devastating, not just for those communities, but for Whitmore Enterprises' reputation." One of the board members, a woman named Diane, leaned forward. "Brandon, we understand your passion, but the numbers don't lie. The program hasn't delivered the kind of returns we expected." "Because you're measuring the wrong kind of returns," Brandon countered. "This isn't about profit margins, it's about impact. It's about creating opportunities and fostering trust. That's worth more than any financial gain." The room fell silent as the board members exchanged uncertain glances. Arthur leaned back in his chair, studying Brandon carefully. "You make a compelling argument," he said finally. "But compelling arguments don't pay the bills." Brandon clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. He thought of Emma, of Lily, of the countless families whose lives had been touched by the program. And then an idea struck him. If it's about the money, he said slowly, then let's talk partnerships. The Whitmore Foundation could work with the company to co-fund the program. We'll share the financial burden and ensure its sustainability. The board murmured among themselves, their interest piqued. Arthur's expression shifted, a hint of curiosity replacing his earlier skepticism. That's an interesting proposition, Arthur said. But we'd need to see a detailed proposal before making any decisions. You'll have it by the end of the week, Brandon promised. When Brandon returned home that evening, he found Emma sitting on the floor with Lily, helping her build a tower out of colorful blocks. The sight brought a smile to his face, even as the weight of the day lingered. How did it go? Emma asked, looking up as he entered. It's not over yet, Brandon said, sitting beside her. But I think we have a chance. I suggested a partnership between Whitmore Enterprises and the Foundation to keep the program alive. Emma's eyes lit up with hope. That's a brilliant idea. Brandon smiled, leaning over to kiss her forehead. I couldn't have done it without you. You're the one who taught me to see beyond the numbers, to focus on what really matters. Emma squeezed his hand, her gaze filled with pride. We're in this together, Brandon. Always. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and late nights as Brandon and Emma worked tirelessly to draft the proposal. They brought in experts from both the Foundation and Whitmore Enterprises, crafting a plan that emphasized the program's social and economic benefits. By the time the proposal was ready, Brandon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He presented it to the board with confidence, outlining the potential for the partnership to create lasting change. This isn't just about saving a program, he concluded. It's about showing that Whitmore Enterprises can lead by example, that we can use our resources to build a better future for everyone. The room erupted into applause, and even Arthur Graves couldn't hide a small smile. The partnership was approved, and the community investment program was not only saved but expanded. The collaboration between Whitmore Enterprises and the Whitmore Foundation became a model for corporate social responsibility, inspiring other companies to follow suit. For Brandon and Emma, the victory was a reminder of what they could achieve together. Their journey had been far from easy, but each challenge had only strengthened their bond and deepened their commitment to making a difference. Years later, as Brandon and Emma stood on a stage at an awards ceremony honoring their work, they reflected on how far they had come. Emma, now a celebrated leader in the nonprofit world, spoke first, her voice filled with emotion. This journey has taught me that love and purpose are the most powerful forces in the world, she said. And when we come together to lift each other up, there's nothing we can't accomplish. When it was Brandon's turn to speak, he turned to Emma, his heart full. This woman taught me what it means to truly live, to fight for what matters and to never give up, no matter the odds. I'm the man I am today because of her. The audience erupted into applause, their cheers a testament to the impact Brandon and Emma had made, not just as individuals, but as partners, parents, and changemakers. As they left the stage, hand in hand, Brandon leaned close to Emma and whispered, "We did it." Emma smiled, her eyes shining. "We're just getting started." That night, as they tucked Lily into bed and watched her drift off to sleep, Brandon and Emma sat together by the window, looking out at the city lights. "We've built something beautiful," Emma said softly, resting her head on Brandon's shoulder. "We have," Brandon agreed, wrapping his arm around her. "And we'll keep building. For us, for Lily, and for everyone who believes in what we stand for." As the stars twinkled above, the couple closed their eyes, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. Their story was far from over, and they were ready for whatever came next, together. As Brandon and Emma's lives continued to flourish, their work and love story became a beacon of hope for people far and wide. The Whitmore Foundation grew into a national symbol of progress, and the partnership with Whitmore Enterprises demonstrated that change could happen when people came together with a shared purpose. But life, as always, had a way of testing them further. One winter evening, as snow blanketed the city, Brandon sat in his study reviewing proposals for a new affordable housing project. Emma entered the room, holding a tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. "You've been at this for hours," she said, setting the tray on the desk. "Take a break." Brandon smiled up at her, his eyes tired but grateful. I can't help it. This project is big. It could change so many lives. Emma sat beside him, her hand resting on his. And you will. But you also need to take care of yourself. We both do. Her words resonated deeply. Lately, the weight of their responsibilities had begun to take a toll. Balancing their work, family, and personal lives was no small feat, and while they supported each other at every turn, the challenges of leadership and public scrutiny often felt relentless. We should go away, Brandon said suddenly, the idea forming as he spoke. Just the three of us. Somewhere quiet. Emma raised an eyebrow, surprised by the suggestion. You mean to take a vacation? Exactly, Brandon said, his enthusiasm growing. We deserve it. Lily deserves it. Let's step away from everything for a little while and just be a family. Emma's smile widened as she considered the idea. You know what? That sounds perfect. A week later, the Whitmore family found themselves in a cozy cabin nestled in the mountains. The snow-covered landscape was serene, the air crisp and invigorating. For the first time in months, they felt truly disconnected from the chaos of their busy lives. Lily squealed with delight as Brandon pulled her on a sled through the snow, her laughter echoing through the trees. Emma watched from the porch, her heart swelling with joy at the sight of her husband and daughter. This was what they had worked so hard for, not just the public victories, but the private moments of love and connection. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Emma leaned her head on Brandon's shoulder. Thank you for this, she said softly. I didn't realize how much we needed it. Brandon kissed the top of her head. Me neither. But seeing you and Lily like this, it reminds me why we do everything we do. Emma nodded, her hand resting on his. This is our foundation. No matter how busy life gets, this is what matters most. When they returned to the city, they felt renewed, their bond stronger than ever. But the world hadn't stopped moving in their absence, and new challenges awaited them. One morning, Emma received a call from one of the foundation's program directors. A local politician had introduced legislation that would significantly cut funding for community programs, including several initiatives run by the foundation. The news hit Emma like a punch to the gut. This can't happen, she said, pacing the living room as she relayed the details to Brandon. These programs are lifelines for so many families. If the funding gets cut, we'll fight it, Brandon said, his voice resolute. We've faced worse before, and we've come out stronger. This time won't be any different. Together, they sprang into action, rallying their network of supporters and organizing a campaign to oppose the legislation. Emma led town hall meetings, sharing stories of the people whose lives would be impacted by the cuts, while Brandon worked behind the scenes to garner political and corporate support. The fight was grueling, and the opposition was fierce. Critics accused the foundation of overstepping its bounds, while lobbyists for private interests pushed to redirect the funds elsewhere. But Emma and Brandon refused to back down. One particularly heated town hall meeting stood out. Emma stood at the front of the room, facing a skeptical audience that included both supporters and detractors. She spoke with passion and conviction, her voice unwavering despite the tension in the air. These programs are not just numbers on a budget, she said. They are the difference between stability and struggle for countless families. They are the hope that keeps communities thriving. And we cannot afford to let that hope be taken away. A man in the audience stood, his arms crossed. That's easy for you to say, he said, his tone sharp. You're a Whitmore. You've got money and connections. What do you know about struggle? Emma paused, taking a deep breath before responding. You're right, she said. I do have privileges now that I didn't have before. But I wasn't born into this life. I grew up in a small apartment, working as a maid to make ends meet. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to fight for every opportunity. And that's why I'm here, because I refuse to forget where I came from. Her words silenced the room, and a ripple of applause began to spread. By the end of the meeting, even some of the skeptics had softened, their perspectives shifted by Emma's sincerity. The campaign reached its climax at a public hearing where the legislation would be debated. Brandon and Emma sat side by side, listening intently as community leaders, program beneficiaries, and experts testified about the importance of the programs. When it was Emma's turn to speak, she stood tall, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. "These programs are about more than just funding," she said. "They're about dignity, opportunity, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to succeed. Cutting them would not only hurt the most vulnerable among us, it would hurt us all." Her speech was met with thunderous applause, and when the vote was finally cast, the legislation was defeated. The victory was hard-earned, and it solidified Brandon and Emma's reputation as champions for justice and equity. As they celebrated with their team that evening, Emma and Brandon took a moment to themselves, stepping outside to look up at the stars. "We did it," Emma said, her breath visible in the chilly night air. "I can't believe we actually did it." Brandon wrapped his arms around her, his voice filled with pride. "You did it. You're incredible, Emma. I don't know how you do it all." Emma smiled, leaning into him. "I do it because of you. Because of Lily. Because of everything we've built together." They stood in silence for a while, the weight of the moment settling over them. For all the challenges they had faced, they knew their fight was far from over. But they also knew they would face whatever came next together, their love and partnership stronger than anything the world could throw at them. In the years that followed, Brandon and Emma continued to make their mark, both as leaders and as a family. The foundation expanded its reach, launching new initiatives that addressed everything from climate change to educational equity. Lily grew up watching her parents work tirelessly to make the world a better place, their example shaping her into a compassionate and driven young woman. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Brandon and Emma returned to the Whitmore estate for a celebration hosted by Eleanor and Richard. The Grand Hall, once a symbol of the life Brandon had left behind, was now a place of warmth and joy, filled with friends, family, and the legacy they had created together. As they danced under the glittering chandeliers, Brandon looked into Emma's eyes and smiled. 20 years, he said softly. "Can you believe it?" Emma laughed, her hand resting on his chest. "Sometimes it feels like 20 minutes. Other times, 20 lifetimes." Brandon chuckled. "I wouldn't trade a single moment." "Neither would I," Emma said, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for choosing me, Brandon. For fighting for us." Brandon kissed her forehead, his love for her as strong as ever. "Thank you for being the reason I had something worth fighting for." As the music swelled around them, they held each other close, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. Their journey had been anything but conventional, but it was theirs, a story of love, resilience, and the belief that the strongest foundations are built not on wealth or power, but on trust, understanding, and the courage to follow your heart.